when I'm working on something like this, I will usually set up a new window for myself that I drop over to my secondary monitor. That I just have at a really small size like this, so that I can see what it's potentially going to look like on a phone or on a different device, or even on PC in game, because you never, if you're looking at this, you're never seeing anything in the game at this size on your PC monitor. Everything is like sitting down here in your hand or up here on the card, on the play board. So it's really important to be able to keep an eye on that.
So, Luke, with this, you're at a point where I feel like most people would be delighted to have even a piece at this level of quality. So, what are you looking at specifically to kind of round this out now?
I'm really, at this point, a lot of it comes down to defining the materials. So everything is sort of the same, is lit mostly the same way, and is all sort of flat-ish in the same way. The only real breakup at the moment is the tail in the middle here has got a little bit of shine to it, and these wings have a little bit here. But that's something that I really want to push. So like getting the materials of these like shiny sort of lizard or salamander skin pieces versus this sort of softer antenna or butterfly wing pieces, and then getting the metal frame, which I think is what it's going to be. So really pushing those, making sure, and then going through and cleaning up some of this like messy brushstroke work. I was talking about it a little bit yesterday, but Hearthstone, the art style is very handcrafted, and it's not bad to be able to see the brushstrokes in some of our things. Like it's nice to feel like what you're playing with in the game was created by somebody, but at the same time, we do have to cheat a little bit sometimes and pretend we were more confident in our painting right off the bat than we actually are. So like some of this stuff gets a little bit squidgy and too scribbly. So cleaning that up and simplifying some of these brush strokes to read a little bit more simply is something else that I'd like to do. And then from a technical point of view, there's going to be a little bit of breaking up. So I'm probably going to have to cut, because I haven't been very conscientious about how my layer setup's been so far. I've just basically been creating a new layer and flattening down every time I feel like doing a new stage. So I'm going to go through and cut out at least the centerpiece with these feathers, so that, and then paint in some of the background behind it, so that when the 3D artist takes this card back and turns it into a 3D model, they're able to have that move around and not lose like the underneath, so that there's space for animation.
So we've had a couple questions about if we're going to be doing if we're going to be streaming the 3D for this as well. We're just going to be doing the 2D for this one, for this stream. I think it would be super cool to have some like 3D effects, etc. streams in the future, so we'll see, fingers crossed. But one thing that Luke and I are going to be talking about a bit as he's wrapping this up, and like he's already mentioned, is what we would do while we're taking this into 3D and doing some of the animation and stuff for it there. Not quite the same, but without bouncing around computers and stuff, we'll try to at least kind of get the general gist of it across. Luke, someone was wondering how you decided the frame color on this within your overall palette.
So the frame really, so sometimes the cards have like, the frame is a really important part of the overall design. And sometimes, as in this case, it's sort of more, we need something to keep it all coherent and feel like one solid piece. But the real heroes of the design are the wings and this curl in the center. So really, I'm looking for something neutral that doesn't clash too much with any of the colors that already are on there. Something relatively dark so that it doesn't, again, fight with some of these really bright colors in the center. So I've got this sort of, and we don't really like doing anything to, like, everything should feel rich and vibrant. So even though it's a sort of, I'm aiming for like a darkish sort of neutral metal tone, it's gonna have some of these purples and some of these blues in there to really like gel with the colors of the rest of the card back, rather than just a complete neutral gray, which would probably actually stand out more than I'd want it to. But I'm not 100% sold on where exactly that's going to go. So that's part of today, is going to be working out what that material is going to be looking like.
So another thing that someone was wondering was how you know that the card is the correct resolution and size for the final. Cards in particular, because we might use them in other places, we tend to work pretty large. I think most card backs are done at 3K. Is that right, Luke?
Let's have a look. Yeah. Oh, good. Wait, no, this isn't quite that high.
Oh no! Start over.
No, this is the perfect time to make it bigger before I've started working on those final details, because a lot of the time, the resolution of the of this like rough stage, it really doesn't matter if you have to blow it up a little bit more. But once you start rendering those final details in, it can be really good to make sure that those are the details that stay sharp if you have to see the whole thing at a big size.
Yep. And then I think the final resolution in game is usually 512 by 512, which is pretty common for a lot of our higher res textures in the actual game. Right, someone wants to know what the crop thing you just did is. What the shortcut is.
It's just, so this is, the crop tool in Photoshop has been updated a reasonable amount over the years. So C is the shortcut, and it just, I think there's an option to turn legacy crop back on, which is the way it used to work. But this is just adjusting. You can just adjust the size of your canvas if you want, make it bigger or smaller. It was definitely a bit of a jump when, I think it might have been like 2 versions ago that they updated it. It took a bit of getting used to compared to the old one, but it's pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it. But it can be really handy. And it's definitely one of the biggest advantages of working in digital over drawing on paper is being able to say, oh, all right, I can just add a little bit more canvas to the edge of this painting instead of starting a drawing and getting to the edge of the page and just being like, I guess that's that then. I guess this person's arm is really close to their body.
Yep, composition lol.
Yeah.
So I guess on that note, do you want to, for anyone who has not been here for the other streams or just missed that particular part, do you want to run through your general like hardware software setup for what you're using right now?
Sure. So I'm just working in Photoshop. It's pretty much the only program that I use in my day-to-day work, outside of very occasionally having to take things into or out of Unity. I'm working on a Cintiq, which is pretty fancy. I didn't have one at my home office until we started working from home, and I was so I used to use just a Wacom tablet, but I've been working on a Cintiq at work for quite a few years now, and I'm definitely pretty much used to that. And my general, I don't do anything too crazy in Photoshop. normal, it's pretty much all just straight up painting. Not too much layer style stuff, not too much like fancy brushes or anything like that. For Hearthstone, the style is very hand painted, and so if you try and use too many of like shortcuts that help you generate art in Photoshop, which can be really helpful for different styles of art, it can sometimes be a little too obvious that things were created in Photoshop, and it's something we sort of want to avoid.
So, Luke, about how many card backs are we making every month? I want to say it's probably between like 2 and 3, yeah?
Yeah, that sounds
Because
about
we've always
right.
got the seasonal one. And...
Yeah. A seasonal one, maybe one for an expansion, and maybe other like events or things. That sounds about right. I saw that question, and yeah, it's not. It doesn't really like come up with people running out of ideas or having like too much art block for them. Generally, just because even though as a team we're working on maybe three card backs at any given month or any given time, it's not the same artist who's working on all of them at once. So we've got, depending on the time, someone like people are more dedicated to card backs or less so, but yeah, we've got it spread out across the art team. And there are a lot of ideas. So this is actually my first card back, so it initially was definitely a little concerned. I was like, I don't know, I'm not going to be able to come up with something, especially because these seasonal card backs are unlike the set card backs that come with the expansion or like the PvE card backs that are very obviously related to like the adventures that you're doing. The seasonal the ladder reward card backs don't have to be related to like anything specific. There's not a specific theme that they have to stick to, which is great because you get to choose like whatever you want a lot of the time, but it also means you have to decide what you want out of thousands of options. So being my first one, I was like, oh no, I'm probably never going to be able to think of something to do. And then as soon as I actually sat down and started thinking about it, and then also just having conversations with people, stuff comes up immediately. It's like, oh yeah, let's, and then you end up with immediately a huge list of card backs that you want to do that we're never going to have time to hit all of.
And how far in advance are you usually working on stuff for card backs in particular? Like a lot of I know we've talked before about how like design gets started on sets like a year in advance. You guys are coming in fairly early on that to help out with the style guide that will then inform like all of the card art for the whole set. Effects mostly comes in a little bit closer to like a few months before ship, after all of the cards and mechanics and stuff are relatively final, aside from anything that needs really early work for playtesting, like, you know, magnetic needs to work before you can really meaningfully playtest with it, stuff like that. But for card backs in particular, and like more of the 2D side of things, where are you usually, like how far in advance are you usually working?
I mean, this is a pretty good example. This is the card back for September, which, what are we, I can do math in my head, 3 months out-ish, not quite, a little longer. So that's probably about as far as we go. We want to give ourselves a little bit of a buffer. Sometimes, especially for seasonal card backs, if people have a good idea or we're working on something, we can do it even further out. It's a good task that we can fit in around other work, because even if it gets created too soon, the seasonal ones especially, it's like we can put this in later, like we'll find a place for it, so that can be easy. As far as the other card backs that have to go based on a set, it's probably anywhere to 4 to 6 months out. It's the card backs, and like it goes a little bit along with the card pack as well. We usually try and do those a little bit later in the set, just to make sure that the other, like the theme and the art style for the set, like there's art hooks have been decided already. Like we've got a lot of the time we'll take inspiration for the cinematics that are getting worked on from our cinematics team, and so waiting until those are, if not finished, then at least like well underway, so that we can see. We want to make sure every piece of art that goes into surrounding a set really feels cohesive, and like it belongs in the same little group. So basically, we just have enough time for the 3D and effects artists to put it together. Hopefully.
I mean, if not, we know where you sit. Well, under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
It's less of a threat right now. Someone was wondering about how we have a lot of pieces of card art that are pretty small crops from a bigger scene, and if that's kind of the usual. It was pretty common. A lot of our older art is just from the WoW TCG, or is from like cool pieces of WoW art in general, several of which Luke worked on. But these days, at this point, pretty much all of the art that we get in for Hearthstone is done specifically for Hearthstone, and so our artists now have the templates for, like, if they're working on painting an image for a minion, then they'll have the minion template with like the little oval overlay and stuff like that. They'll have the overlay for a spell, etc. So these days, a lot more stuff is just tailored to the crop that it will actually be in and the type of card, or if it's, key art that might go on a poster or anything like that, then the artists know that from the get-go. So these days, pretty much everything is composed like for the card it will actually be on. So it used to be quite common to like find the piece of a larger piece of art that would work and kind of crop down to that. It's much, much rarer these days. Someone else was wondering about, I've talked a couple times about how the effects team likes to try and hit classic animations, updates to classic animations when we have some time in the schedule. And yeah, it is like this person was asking, it's tricky to come by that free time because we're doing a lot of cool new stuff, and we want to make sure that all of that stuff is up to like, the quality bar that people expect, and it's feeling awesome, stuff like that. And they also mentioned in their own work that they deal with a lot of tech debt, which and they were wondering if there's like art debt as well, which there definitely is. I'm actually working on trying to fix some like weird like project organization art debt with some of the engineers right now. But yeah, there's a there's a lot of stuff just from the game's growing a lot. It's been 6 years, and a lot of how we work and how we would like to work has changed since the game got started up. So yeah, there's always tech debt, there's always art debt. I think that's very true on any project, certainly true on ours. And yeah, we definitely try to find time to fix it because it just makes everyone's life better. Luke,
Yeah.
someone would... Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, that's something that there's a fine line. Adjusting things that actually make like development of the game easier, or like fixing like quick solutions that were implemented at some point that really were never meant to last as long as they did is always important. There's definitely an element of, I mean, pretty much every artist has things that they created at some point that then get put out and they look back on and go, "Ooh, I wish we could just." Whether it was just because of their skills have improved or because there wasn't time whenever something was initially created to be like, oh, we could go back and put a little bit more effort into that. It is definitely a dangerous slope to be in sometimes, because you can, I mean, this is not necessarily relevant to Hearthstone, but when I worked on Heroes, we ran into that a lot, because we're creating assets over such a long period of time that by the time we were like 3 years into development, all the heroes that we created right at the start of the game really just didn't hold up. And so we went back and updated a whole heap of heroes. And then by the time we updated those, the newer heroes that were now only a year old didn't hold up as well anymore. Or not necessarily hold up, but they, like, you continue to make better art. And yeah, it's definitely a fine line to walk between. But here we go. Looks like we're back. Sorry about that. Not sure what is going on.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm not sure where we got cut off. So, yeah. Are there any approved pieces of art that you look back on, wish they had been done better? For me, basically everything.
Yeah, pretty much. There's almost not. It would be a much shorter list to look back at and say, what's a piece of art that has been put out that you are 100% happy with? Because that's definitely not.
Yeah, I can give you that list. It is 0 things long. But,
yeah, because there's anywhere between your skills updating and improving to just wishing you always had more time to work on any one thing. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like, so coming up with a single thing that I really, I don't know, I don't want to call anything out in case people go back and look at it and be like, yeah, he's right, that's terrible. How did that get through? How did that get approved?
Yeah, I think I think that's true for every artist on the team. Like, you know, the stuff you're proudest of, you're probably still like 80% happy with. It's never done. You just run out of time. So something a bit more on the effects side. Someone was wondering earlier. I guess we could both talk about this, Luke. Someone was wondering how closely we're working together with the designers who are doing all of the card mechanics, and if there are moments where someone from the art section has like such a cool character idea that it actually got implemented into the game. So, Luke, do you want to answer that from the 2D side first, then I can talk a little bit about the effects?
Sure. Well, design-wise, like, we get all of the art briefs come from design, basically. So when and this is mostly for like the freelance artists who get the briefs to start creating stuff, those are all set with a collaboration between design and our outsource managers. And those things generally try and work really hand in hand with what makes sense for the card. When it comes down to art driving things, there's definitely, that's what we talked about it a little bit for the style guides for each set. So we will have a kickoff for every new set that we're going to work on, and pretty much the whole art team is involved in at least giving ideas and saying, oh, this would be cool for that set. And so there have definitely been occasions where art has created the style guide that our freelance artists are going to be working from, and then design sees something cool in that style guide, and runs with that. And so we have meetings while we're working on that involves both art and design, just to really like make sure that everyone's on the same page, and then be able to collaborate back and forth on what is going into the game.
Yeah, I think so on the effect side, since we're most of the effects team is starting on creating effects after all of the characters and mechanics and stuff are pretty much finalized, because we used to work earlier, but if stuff isn't finalized yet, then because we're kind of everything we're doing is tailored to the mechanics and the characters on the cards, it could result in a lot of wasted work. So now we're kind of at the tail end of things, right before audio. So we have like we have the mechanics, we have the stat lines, we have the card art, we have the VO and all of that. We have all of that to kind of take into account with the effects that we're making, which is really, really cool. We, myself in particular, but kind of whoever's helping out with the very early parts of that set, will be in a lot of talks with design much earlier than that, in part to make sure that just to kind of know what's coming, but a lot of it is because we want to be getting a head start on anything that's just really, really critical mechanically. So things like Magnetic or Galacron, or all the different iterations of stuff that we went through for Demon Hunter, will all of those start getting discussed pretty early on in the initial design process. So not quite a year in advance of the set releasing, but close to it. And that's stuff that's kind of a much smaller group of people across a bunch of different disciplines, and like UI, engineering, design, effects, whoever's needed, working together on those early things to make sure that they're feeling good. We've got a good prototype for playtest so that we can start getting feedback on it, stuff like that. So effects is kind of at both ends of the pipeline there.
As far as other things coming up and getting put into the game, I keep going back, partly just because I've only been on the Hearthstone team itself officially for 6 months, even though I've been working on various aspects of the game for quite a while. But one of my favorite stories about just coming up with something out of the blue that everybody just agreed that it needed to be in the game was the Deathwing Diva skin in Heroes, which basically we had the Diva and Genji announcement video, which there had been some interesting hype built in the community over the potential for a Deathwing launch or announcement. So basically everybody watched the stream where we announced those two new heroes, and I immediately went upstairs and sketched out maybe half an hour an idea for Deathwing Diva, and put it up on our internal art page, and immediately everybody just said, what can we shuffle around in our schedule here to make this work? And that we took a look at some things, moved some things around, and was like, yeah, all right, we can fit it in, do it. So I mean, that's the sort of thing where if you have artists who are enthusiastic about the game and always wanting to come up with something new or find a way of putting something new into the game, it can be really cool. And it just keep talking with designer, with the rest of the team, and if you're in an environment where everyone feels like they can contribute, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really thought about a lot of teams. Obviously, it happens on Heroes too, but like I've myself effects is pretty far removed from the character creation process in a lot of ways. But even then, just because the Hearthstone team is like a lot of us really like to chat and we like to share ideas across different teams and stuff. There have been not like wholesale characters, but definitely like new ideas for characters that got incorporated into what was already there that have come from people on the effects team recently. And I think that's kind of true all across the team. We try to make sure that everyone's comfortable talking about their ideas, and that's something that I really like about our team. I think it's super cool. And yeah, I'm excited about the stuff that I asked about that's getting integrated. It's gonna be sweet. In my totally unbiased opinion.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Luke, we've got a bunch of questions for you.
Right.
One kind of higher level one. Someone was wondering how you got as fluent as you are with all the art software, and what sort of steps someone could take to just increase their proficiency of knowledge of something like Photoshop, where the rabbit hole just never really ends.
I mean, I've been using a version. I was lucky, and my father was an illustrator, graphic designer who worked from home. So I've been using a version of Photoshop since probably 1999 or 2000. Wow, that's 20 years, isn't it?
We're old, Luke. Sorry.
So that definitely helps. But I mean, honestly, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, like I know a reasonable amount of the ins and outs of Photoshop, but for my actual like day-to-day work, it's all pretty much just painting. Like there's very few. I use layer styles occasionally, especially working on like logos or something maybe, but as a general rule, I pretty much just paint. I've used layers normally. I'll use like adjustment layers a little bit. There are some tricks that I've learned here or there, but really like a few Gumroad tutorials and then just practicing your painting, I think will really do it. Like I'm always surprised because I don't do that much traditional painting these days, but I'm always surprised when I go back and do that, like how much the art that I've been doing in Photoshop has made me a better painter. And then I'm always, again, it's very nice to see if I go and do even just a painting of some sort and then come back into Photoshop and realize that any of those things that I learned while doing that are pretty much straight directly transferable. Like it's all, a lot of the challenge is in like knowing how color works, knowing how light works, knowing like how something compositionally should feel, especially as that relates to like an IP or a game that you're working on, and none of that has to do with how well you can use Photoshop or not. But yeah, practice is good.
So another thing someone was wondering about was that even though you are in Photoshop right now, you're not really using any masks or adjustment layers. Do you use those at all? Or is it just a preference for you to skip all of that?
I do, yeah. A lot of the time, adjustment layers are. I would use those, I think, more often in actual illustration, and I might. That's one of the things that I do towards the end of a piece. I wouldn't. I use them more for creating, like doing final adjustments to a piece of art or a final illustration, rather than throughout the process. The only time that I would occasionally do that is often I find, and it might be a Photoshop thing, or it might just be a me thing. I find when I'm starting out sketching in color, things can get a little bit too muddy, or if I'm not quite sure of my color, like palette, I will sometimes add a saturation layer or a levels layer. I can find I sometimes get like I've been painting for ages, and then suddenly I realize that like what I thought was my brightest like white in the scene is actually only like 60% white, and everything is just really crunched down into a narrow range. And sometimes that can be nice, and sometimes it's like, oh, I don't want to have to repaint all of my highlights or something, so I'll use adjustment layers in those situations. But yeah, and again, it comes down to Hearthstone style is very much like everything is hand painted, and while those things can be really helpful for certain types of illustration, I like being able to do all this sort of thing in just in 2D painting. I will use things like gradient maps. So when we work on, for example, the packs. So recently we set up the class card packs, which I think we've got 2 out right now. But those, because they're a range of packs that are pretty much they're almost the same. They take the same like base template, and each have a similar like adjustment to depending on the class. Therefore, I'll use that'll be a situation where I'm using a lot more masks and gradient maps to get those and to be able to make those colors easily adjustable to translate across all of the classes we need to build for. And so there are times like that when it's a really helpful thing to be able to understand those slightly more advanced elements in Photoshop.
So a couple more for you, Luke. Someone was wondering about how you chose the color for the central swirl in particular as part of your like overall color scheme.
Initially, I had thought, so I'm not sure if I had it up in the sketch earlier. Initially, I'd thought that might be a sort of bright green, partly like the fairy dragon sort of, their magic a lot of the time is sort of a teal green, and I might, I sort of want to play around with it a little bit, but I think there's so much blue green in the background of this card back already, and especially in the tail here that has that is blue and purple, that I think if you had the yellow felt more natural as a contrast to that, even though it's similar to these like RNG feathers or antenna here. I think it stands out more against the rest of the card, which is a really important thing for that central swirl, because it's going to be the main magical focus of the card back, and it's going to be the thing that you sort of notice the most at a glance, because it'll be glowy and shiny, and so having a color there that really stands out from the rest of the card back is important. And I didn't want to choose a color that didn't exist at all on the card back. Like sometimes it's nice if you have something fairly muted or like relatively monochromatic, then you can introduce another color to really pop there. But because there's so many colors going on this card back already, I wanted to choose something that fit and didn't feel too out of place and didn't add another like element to the rainbow.
So someone was wondering if we have the name of a card back before we start on it. Not like the specific names are always done much later on after the card back is done, like the ones with cute puns or what have you. As far as like the general, like the broad theme for a card back, it kind of varies, because of course we want to do things that are tied to like expansions, adventures, stuff like that. We know those are coming, and then there are some like Brightwing that are just kind of what artists are feeling at the time. So Luke, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that. I know we've talked about it a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, looking at, it's probably a two-part question. Like, we have our themes and our, like, direction set fairly early on. But yeah, the funny names that end up in Hearthstone that are the final actual wordplay or actual just title are always come in at the end, so that we make sure that we can find the very best one. And I'm sure occasionally the artist or somebody will have just a really good idea for it, and then that will stick through the whole process. But more often than not, it's just that's the end of basically the final touch.
I was also wondering which card back. Well, the first part of the question was, do both of us have all of the card backs? Super no, unfortunately. But which one each of us is most sad to have missed?
I mentioned this on Monday's stream, but I'm sure if I looked at all of them now, there are a few that I really, really think are super cool. Actually, did you say it was the March card back this year? Was the Koi Pond?
Oh, you're gonna steal my answer.
All right, I won't steal that one. Here, I'll let you take that. No, I had yeah. All right, this Dark Wanderer Diablo one, which wasn't even difficult to get. All you had to do was log in to Hearthstone, and I still somehow missed. Getting it. So I really like that one, and I'll let you.
Yeah, mine's definitely the seasonal Koi Pond one that we had recently. I hadn't been playing enough that month, and it's such a beautiful card back. Will did such a good job, so I've been kicking myself for that one ever since.
Yeah, I regret that as well, but we're allowed to have the same regrets.
Big regret. Someone was wondering who on the art team is probably the top our best Hearthstone player. I feel like it's gotta be Linus. Linus is our producer.
Which is obviously why, because he's not an artist. So he's
wow.
Sorry, Linus. Or sorry, everyone else, depending on how you took that.
Yeah, I think that was a diss at everyone else, not Linus. But yeah, Linus is brilliant, and he does not mess around when it comes to gaming. Constructed or Battlegrounds for that matter, he's like god tier at Battlegrounds. Someone was wondering, who is your favorite Blizzard artist, and why is it Laurel Austin? So can we talk for a minute about what a goddess Laurel is?
I was so happy when she joined Blizzard years ago now. But yeah, it's always such a, like, I've had the opportunity to work on a couple of projects with her, and it's always amazing. And not only is she an amazing painter, but she does sculpting, and she helps out with all of the, outside of all her Blizzard animation work, she helps out with all of the sculptures that we do. She does the paint masters for all the super fancy sculptures, and does super fancy sculpting in her spare time as well. Yeah, super good.
Yeah. There was some point when she was, I think it was before I started working at Blizzard by a couple years maybe. But I was at one of the art panels that she was in because I was already in love with her work, and I asked her about because one of the things that she does just absolutely beautifully is really guide your eye with where she puts detail in her paintings, and so I'd asked her about that, and she just without even the slightest bit of pause just went into this whole big long explanation of how she uses detail to how she clusters detail to draw your eye to the most important parts, how she'll distribute detail throughout the painting to keep your eye moving around it, all all this really, really cool stuff.
See,
like
and
this.
that's
Like pulling up like 5 different examples. It's got this and that. And
that's the difference. See, somebody asks a question like that to me, I'm like, just sort of do it, and it works. having an artist be able to actually turn around and give you a concrete reason is pretty wonderful.
Yeah, she is absolutely brilliant. Someone was wondering how long it takes to make a card back from start to finish. Generally, it's like 1.5 to 2 weeks. Most of that will be for the 2D, and then at the end of that, one of the 3D artists will take it over into 3D and do all of the effects and all of that. But yeah, 1 to 2 weeks generally.
Yeah, don't pay attention to the stream where almost the entire thing has been done in 6 hours. This is not how it normally goes.
Someone was wondering about what our day-to-day is like at work.
Come in, get a coffee. What do I do? Sit down, paint. Profit. Take the dog for a walk.
So mine's a little bit different because I'm in a lead role. It's I spend a lot more of my time in meetings. But yeah, I think for most of the artists, definitely like we really want to make sure that they're just kind of getting to spend as much of their time as possible just doing the thing that they're really damn good at. So for a typical like effects day in VFX as well, it's quite similar. You get in, you get a coffee, you pet Luke's dog, and then for most of the day you're just working on effects for whichever expansion we're currently focused on, or adventure, hero skin, etc. Whatever your current assignment is. And then yeah, there's a lot of, depending on where we are in the cycle, there can also be a fair number of meetings that we'll all be in with designers, especially on any of our teams, and then on either 2D or effects, and also with audio on the effects side. Luke's talked a bit about the style guides that they do for that they develop along with the designers to make sure that everything feels nice and cohesive for each of the sets. On the effects side, there are a lot of early discussions, but one of the ones that all of the whole effects team is in is we do kind of a brainstorm / kickoff right before everyone moves on to the expansion. And that's where everyone's got their assignments for the expansion. We spend about a week on the effects team coming up with concepts for each of the cards, for the effects for the card. Talking about those amongst them ourselves, trying to make sure that everything like feels very appropriate to the character, the spell, and is like kind of unique from everything else going on in that set, stuff like that. And then we'll take all of those into a meeting with design and audio, and we can make sure that the designers are happy with everything that we're going to be making for them. They get a chance to voice any concerns or anything else that they hope that will like add to these, stuff like that. And audio gets to see what's coming, which is really, really helpful for them, because then they can do stuff like Foley or field recording a little bit earlier. That was something we talked a lot about Demon Hunter very early on, was like, what do we want their metal and all of their blades to sound like compared to Rogue, for instance. They have quite a different sound there. We're going to be using a lot of wings and fire and smoke, so let's do some audio for stuff like that. And especially for legendaries, we want to make sure that the kind of the tone and personality of the effects matches like the character and the play VO as well. So along with the stat line and the mechanic and the art stuff, we're giving each of the artists the VO and kind of the tone that the VO is going to be acted out in when they're developing those effects. And so that's another place where audio gets to kind of have some say and like chime in if they're not seeing that carried through quite so much in the effects, or just share any ideas that they think would be cool. So yeah, but for the most part, I think ideally it's just a lot of chatting with the people that you're going to be collaborating with and sitting down and doing cool work. Someone was wondering if there's ever a card for a new expansion that gets changed late in the process and then the art just doesn't fit anymore. Definitely yes, but Luke, do you want to expand on that since it's usually a 2D side thing?
Yeah, though I don't have any super great examples off the top of my head. You might remember some more that were specific. Yeah, most of the time that'll happen when designs change. Sometimes it's enough that you can just make some small tweaks to the design, to the 2D art, especially if it's card art. But sometimes we basically just have to say, well, that one doesn't fit anymore, and either commission a new piece of art or have someone internal do a new piece of art to fit. And then in a lot of those cases, we'll try and then later on down the line find a use for the original piece that got changed. So you'll see things show up in like adventures or stuff that may have been created for a different purpose that can now finally see the light of day because it was a better idea won through in the end.
Yeah, I think there was a similar question asked of if there's ever anything that we've had to scramble to come up with a new effect or art or anything like that towards the end of things. It's definitely gotten less and less common as we've kind of like smoothed out the pipeline and stuff over the years. But I guess the one that I always remember the most clearly, I've talked about Glimmerroot a lot on this stream, and I'm sorry to everyone who's just sick of hearing about Glimmerroot, but that one we changed, I think, about 2 weeks before bug fixing, and to the mechanic we actually shipped with. And so doing the art for that one, or the effects for that one, actually spilled into bug fixing a little bit because they took quite a bit of time. So super fun, but man, that one came in hot. That's the most extreme example I can think of. There's definitely cases where we do just like we want to do what's right for each of the sets and kind of make sure that we're nailing everything flavor-wise and that all of the pieces of a card feel good together. So sometimes there are some pretty last-minute things that we have to scramble on, but usually it's kind of terrifying and fairly fun, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, generally when that has to happen, it's because we've found something cooler that we want to replace something with. So it's usually a situation of, can we make this work? And everyone is usually excited about the new. It's not like, oh no, here's this thing that we really loved, but now we have to cut it for something boring. So yeah, it's usually a matter of like everyone just turning around being like, how can we make this work? We don't have much time, but we're going to try and do it. But yeah, you're definitely right in that, like, over the years we've gotten better at like knowing when these things might show up and building time to account for that sort of thing into the schedule. If there are things that may be more volatile, making sure we start those sooner, that sort of thing.
Had a fair couple of questions about either getting into art or just getting into game dev in general. So, Luke, do you want to speak to that one first, or do you want me to?
You can go for it.
So I think as far as one of the things about game dev definitely to just be aware of out the gate is it is quite competitive, especially concept art and design, I would say, are probably the two toughest ones to get into. So it's something definitely like make sure that you really enjoy what you're going for, because it's a lot of practice. It's a lot of, especially on the art side, building up a portfolio of art that's relevant to what you're doing. If you're looking to get more into something like design or engineering, then I think it tends to be a little bit more fewer individual pieces and more just projects. Like I've built this game in my free time, or I made this level. I worked on these scripts or built this tool or something like that. But yeah, I think I think it's kind of worth trying out a little bit of everything to know, like to make sure that you know that you really love the thing that you're trying to commit to. I say that, but I've had 3 completely different career tracks in like 10 years, so
that's the perfect example. You've tried a bunch of different things, right?
Yeah, eventually I got there. Luke just knew. Luke just knew, and then he went out and became a god. But yeah, I think there are a lot of like tutorials, guides, forums, resources online for free now that you can use to start just kind of learning about all the different options and practicing the thing that sounds exciting to you. And at that point, I think a lot of it is just practice, make sure that you're creating things that are relevant to what you want to be doing, and ideally like the games that you want to, or at least the type of games that you want to be doing them on. I think I mean, Luke can talk a little bit about all of his fan art that he did getting in here. I have also done way less fan art than Luke, and it's all way less cool. But I've done stuff in like 3D and effects that was kind of fan art for various games that I was applying to. And like, yeah, if you do one piece really well in that style, then I think that tends to catch people's eye and help a lot. Be someone who's nice to work with, definitely. That is huge. You're going to be spending so much time together. So definitely be good to work with. And I think it's very easy to get into it's very easy to kind of get into your own little bubble, which I think is one of the things where online communities in particular become very important. If you have real life communities too, then even better. But just make sure that you're seeking feedback and you're like, seeing where you stand compared to your peers and stuff like that, because I think that sort of stuff really, really helps you to grow and kind of help you catch any blind spots that you might have. Luke.
Yeah, I mean that covers a lot of it. Like there's some really good notes in there. I think making sure you're working on things that you're enjoying and not just doing anything that that you think you're doing just because you feel like you should, because a lot of the time that can lead to you doing something that that you're not enjoying. Though at the same time, it depends on how specific you are in what you want to be doing. Like, I was fairly sure that I really wanted to be like an illustrator and concept artist. And I know there are a lot of people, like, it is a fairly high, it's a competitive field, so it can still be a challenge. But if you're really into that, then like focusing is really good. But if you're also on the other end of that, like if you're just interested in making games, like if you're more of a generalist, or you're just more like, I like sort of design, or I like art, or I like a little bit of the technical side, like you can look at elements of production that are not as glamorous or not as immediately popular. Like, I mean, concept artists is a hugely challenging, hugely competitive field. Or whereas you look at like VFX artists or like tech art, it's like people that is really high in demand and really like difficult to find. So if you're looking for an area where you feel like, oh, I want to be in games, what sort of thing am I interested in? And if those things appeal to you, then that could be a really good step too, to like see if you can learn a bit about that. And I was talking to someone the other day, like tech art is an amazing thing, especially if you're trying to get into like creating your own little projects, whether it's in Unity or whatever, because you end up learning like a lot of the different elements that are needed to create a game, and having a well-rounded understanding of not just like one aspect of game, like, oh, I am a 2D artist and that's what I understand. Being able to be knowledgeable about other elements of the game, of the game production like pipeline, even if it's just from, oh yeah, I made this little indie game with me and a buddy, and it never really went anywhere, I just did the side project. That can be super helpful.
A few people were wondering about freelancer, either freelancers or freelancing for card art. I think we've got a MooBot that's got the art submissions at Blizzard email going up every so often. So if you're interested in freelancing for us, you can submit your portfolio through there. And as far as do we still work with freelancers, very much yes. For like 2D card art in particular, almost all of it is done by freelancers. I think we do, Luke, you guys each get a piece per set generally, yeah?
Yeah, no, it's one piece per set. So when I was working as doing Hearthstone stuff on the side outside of work, I would do maybe 2 per set, and depending on people's schedules, you can get, that's about where I was at. But yeah, internally, if we still like to contribute like that, and I really enjoy being able to still do that, for sure. Yeah, it's about one piece per set. It is nice to be on the inside, to be able to speak to Jeremy and be like, oh, what's coming up? That one sounds really cool, rather than just having him just be like, here, this is what you're painting. But yes, we're not at no point in the future are we doing less art than we used to. So we're always on the lookout for amazing artists to work with.
Yeah. Someone was wondering what expansion cards we're currently working on. Such cool ones.
Oh man, I'm really excited. Actually, I just got a brief. I just got the brief for the one that I'm working on for the next set, and I'm really excited.
Yeah, dude, I love this set so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like Luke said, he just got his brief for his. My whole team is currently in the thick of our part of the expansion, and it's rad. And we're working on totally sweet cards. I meant to bring this one up earlier because I had a perfect segue and then I messed it up. But someone was wondering how we prepare for our BlizzCon live demos.
So in the old days, it used to be a lot less intense. It would basically be, as long as we would go in, you'd choose the artist who would go and do it. We'd set up, we'd have a PC at work that you could load all your settings onto. They'd ask what you needed, so I would be like, oh yeah, just do a Cintiq. I mean, a couple of years I just did drawing by hand, and that was always easy. And so it depended on which aspect of the that you were demoing at the time. So I was always just 2D art, and I never had to really set up anything too fancy. To be honest, I pretty much always just ended up doing a sketch like the night before in the hotel at BlizzCon. I was like, this will probably work. It usually worked out okay. As we've gotten more and more like we want to show off more of the pipeline. Like it used to just be here's art and people were painting on stage. Now we try and show off a little bit more like other areas of the development process, and that those things take a lot more time to set up. Like you need a bigger team. So the BlizzCon 2 years ago, the Heroes art team did an entire like pipeline demonstration in like going from concept to modeling to animation to effects, and we had tech art on stage for I think the first time, and that took a lot of pre like setup, and that was also the first year that we'd had the art stage broadcast on with the Blizzard with like the rest of BlizzCon, so you could get it on the live view from home. So again, like we suddenly needed to do a lot more practice because this was going to be broadcast through DirecTV, and yeah, that was a lot more intense. Whereas this last year, I was doing live drawing in the Hearthstone area, and I showed up with some pens and markers and a big pad of paper and just sat there drawing for 8 hours, and that was pretty much it. So
yeah, I think the only one I've done so far is the one for the pack opening, and I get so nervous with this sort of stuff. So I did like a lot of prep for that one. Like I did the entire animation beforehand, and then I went back and like broke it apart into a bunch of prefabs of like various parts of because a pack opening animation usually takes somewhere between like 1 and 3 weeks, and I wasn't going to get that done in 45 minutes, so broke it up into like various interesting stages. I brought like a chart with me of like some of the kind of guidelines we try to use for like the animation arc of pack openings and stuff. And then I got on stage and immediately forgot how to hook up a model to a prefab. So that went well. But yeah, I think it varies. It varies by person, and it varies by what they're working on. Like Luke said, I think a lot of people can just go up there and they're so good at what they do that they can just talk and paint the whole time. And I've seen other people go up with like, even for traditional painting, like all their little stages of it that they want to show off. So yeah, kind of varies a bit, definitely.
So just to point out, as I'm painting here, this is one of the reasons that the card that we can spend a week on a card, even though in the first 4 hours of streaming I went from basically nothing except a tiny little sketch to what I started with this morning, which was this. In the last hour and almost a half, I've gotten this much noodling done, and there's a lot left to go. Like this, it's definitely not a lie to say that the final like finishing touches really do take almost all the time. And again, I'm continuing to have to like try and work out where I'm trying to draw the eye, if things are getting too complicated. Like I'm still trying to work out what I want to do with this area as far as the material goes. Like at the moment it's sort of flat and just painted and there's no real lighting across it. And trying to work out how to approach that is still a challenge in my head.
There've been so a couple questions now for like if you ever have an idea that you really like that you just couldn't make work, if you ever like if there have ever been card back designs that have like or have been submitted and then we're not really feeling it, so we don't wind up using it, or it's just not working for one reason or another.
There have definitely been
like
things at the idea level.
Too many ideas.
There have definitely been things at the idea level where like, I think this would be great, and then you push a little bit and it just doesn't get there. We try to avoid like going all the way on something. Occasionally that'll happen if there's a change of direction at some point. So like during a set, the theme might have been like sort of planned out to begin with, but as everybody works toward, so this happens with concept art a lot, because hopefully by the time like a 3D artist or an effects artist is working on something, you get like you've already got your stuff pretty well set down. But the concept art, you're basically trying to work out what is you're exploring, and there are definitely going to be ideas that, even though they're great on their own, don't necessarily mesh with like the rest of the set or the rest of the the rest of the art that we're trying to build and put together. And so a lot of the time, those things get put in, like we never completely throw anything away. So we've always got a huge backlog of stuff that we had in our head that we could potentially revisit in the future, or pull out and slightly adjust and make work again, especially if it was something that we really liked.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's true across the board and in effects as well. As like, yeah, sometimes there's stuff that seems like it's gonna work, and you get like a little ways into it, and it's just not happening. Or it just like doesn't, something changes and it just doesn't work for the card anymore right then. A lot of times, wherever we're at with that stuff, if we're far enough along, then we'll check it in anyways, and we'll just hold on to it in case it's useful later on. So there's not like, it's trickier with effects than card backs, because a lot of them are very tailor made, and a lot of the card backs like this one are just someone has an awesome idea. So
yeah, and this is easy for me to just say, oh, we're not going to, if for some reason we're like, oh, we're not using this for September, it's totally easy just to put it in like later in the year, or at some other point when we need a cool card back. Whereas for something that really needs to be hooked up to a specific like design, or
someone was wondering what our favorite parts of creating art for Hearthstone are.
I think one of the things that, I mean, it's not the most glamorous thing about it, but I think the thing that, and especially I talked about this a bit the other day, something that I really appreciated when I joined the team officially, rather than working just on card art from the outside, was how much care goes into, and how much like hand painting goes into every element in the game. Like it's all like everything is so that like it's all so hand created. All the textures feel like chunky and real and stylized, yet like there's really chunky but realistic and everything. It's all the material rendering. That's just really satisfying to do. So whenever I get to do something like that, it's I've been really enjoying that lately.
Yeah, I think for me on the effects side, definitely effects in general is just, I think, really, really fun. But the thing I really like about it is that it's a little bit more generalist as far as the art disciplines go, because you need to know how to make effects, of course, but and how to use like different engines, particle systems. But it's a lot of animation. It's a lot of texture painting. It's a lot of getting your materials just right, 3D modeling, occasionally some rigging. You wind up working with the engineers a lot, so, and you have to be accounting for the gameplay and sometimes working with UI, stuff like that. So it's still artistic, but everything is very much a puzzle of trying to find like exactly the right balance of all those different factors, and you get to use a ton of different art skills in the process. So kind of that jack of all trades aspect of it is definitely one of the things that I just really, really love about effects art in particular. Luke, is there anything art-wise that you like really want to work on just at some point in the future?
I think I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I would love to try and at some point for Kata do some traditional painting again. I think that'd be really fun, and seeing people like Alex Horley, or like I've been really inspired by Brahm forever, and his style is definitely not. It's a little too intense, a little too dark for Hearthstone, but like just that traditional painting would be a really fun thing to try and fit into, like, because there are not many games that that allow you to flex that sort of muscle and play around with that. So the fact that Hearthstone, we do have artists who will occasionally do work in paint, or I think that'd be really fun. A little bit nerve-wracking because like the back and forth towards the end of a piece, towards the end of an illustration, can often be like, yeah, tweak this, tweak that, move this thing around, make that brighter. It's like being confident enough to get it right the first time is would definitely be a little intimidating, but that would be really fun.
Yeah, I'm not sure for me. Like, I've been here for, it's getting close to, it's been like 4.5 years now, and I've kind of gotten to do all of the things that way more things than I ever would have thought I would have gotten to do. Like, I came here and I figured maybe I'd get to be able to do like legendary custom summons, and that would be super cool. But I think the thing that I was definitely really, really excited about was just getting to help out with doing all of the new stuff for Demon Hunter and kind of porting all of the like beautiful, beautiful stuff that WoW has done over into the Hearthstone style, and getting to help kind of like define a whole new class on the effects side like that, and just like what it means for Hearthstone and where it fits in with everything else was just really, really fun, really, really cool, and not something you get to do often. So that was really, really exciting. There's been a couple questions about the kind of the 3D and the animation side of this. So one of them was just if Luke will be involved with the 3D side of this, or if someone else is going to be doing it. We generally hand these off to 3D artists to actually do the modeling and all of the shader work that goes into animating them. But Luke, do you want to talk about some of the stuff that you kind of account for as part of the texturing process for
Sure
making it nice for 3D?
Yeah, so as an example, like when I'm getting close to done, which I mean some of these elements are, I'm happy with how this wing is coming along, but at some point, like at the moment, all of these things are pretty much like the layers are all like this, everything is all just here. So I will probably, and I can show you a bit about how this works, we'll probably at some point go back and cut out this middle ring. Let's do this piece for now, and then separate that out so that when it comes time to building the stuff in 3D, then we have the layer set up to work behind, and there's enough art. So now we have So that's a copy, what's it called? Copy merged is really, really helpful and something I use a heap, especially when I'm painting, because I'm not super consistent or clean with my layers. So a lot of the time, if I'm halfway through a painting and I need to move something around, or something needs to be adjusted or transformed, instead of going back through and just adjusting every layer individually, I can just take a new version and adjust that. So now that I have this here, I can go back and then repaint in all these elements that are underneath it. So if the 3D artist, if we want to end up animating these little antennae, then there's something behind them that'll work, and they don't have to put in that time, because it's easy and super easy for me to just complete this sort of these elements here.
So there are a few questions as well about like what's next after this stage, and if we actually like use this asset or if it's just reference. Luke kind of covered it. This will also be pretty much the final texture for the 3D model when it gets handed off. There are parts that might get chopped up, like the antenna in the 3D model, to just so that we can animate them and still have everything show up properly underneath. So the final in-game texture might look mostly like this, but then the antennae are like pushed off to the side or something so that you can see what's underneath them. And that part of the 3D model's UVs will just reference the antennae instead of, and then we'll have the second layer of the model underneath it, looking at the stuff that Luke is painting in here right now. Someone else was wondering about kind of a similar thing, if the artist who paints card art is the same person who does the golden version of that, and if not, then how that process works. And it kind of varies these days. A lot of our goldens are done outside the studio as well, and we've been able to like get a whole really good process going around that for feedback, for getting them all of the assets that they need, giving them briefs for like what these goldens might look like, stuff like that. What we do still, we have all of those tools in house as well. So if people want to be able to animate their own card art, then people within the studio will, or within the team will do that sometimes, because we already have all of the tools. So as long as they know how to use them, they could do that. I think when I first started here, it was right when one of our artists was finishing up his piece of card art. It was Jerry Masco, was finishing up his card art for Vilefin Inquisitor and starting to do the golden on it. And for some reason I remember that really distinctly, probably because I played a lot of Murloc Paladin back then to get Silverfin recruits. But yeah, so it's one of those fun things where on the internal team, like if you want to try out something that's a little bit outside your skill set, do that gold for the card art that you did, then you can. It's not something that gets done for every single piece, because they're two quite different skill sets, but internally people can do it if they want, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, so now that I've set that up, so now we have this piece here, which is the antenna, and then we have the entire backdrop behind there painted in, so that can be there. I should probably actually separate this shadow out. We'll worry about that later. Or I can just soften that so that it doesn't feel as it's a little more nebulous and not as like harsh a shadow, so that if the antenna over the top moves, it doesn't feel too weird. But yeah, that's basically the process of cutting something up towards the end, and filling that in to make sure that it's as easy as possible for the 3D artists to work with. Something else I might do here, and partly it would be to for my own like layer selection is I'm working on these little scales here that are sort of butterfly scale to give a little bit more depth to this butterfly wing material, as opposed to it's just flat painting. And so I might create a new layer that is just a mask for these. I had planned to do that, and hopefully, I'll get that sorted, because I think it'd be really nice to have at the end like a layer of these scales across the entirety of the wing, even if they're not visible the entire time. Then we could have like a sheen run across them once the thing's animated, and it could be really pretty.
Got a couple that I wanted to rapid fire through. Someone was wondering earlier who comes up with the flavor text for the cards, and that one's actually we have one of our designers, Valerie, who is in charge of organizing all of this, and if there are like no suggestions, then she's in charge of being funny on command for anything that doesn't get suggestions. But Valerie will send out like a bunch of cards every week for people to submit flavor text suggestions for, and so it's kind of a team-wide thing, and anyone who feels like particularly inspired by a given card or just has a pun that they really, really want to make sure that people read, stuff like that, Valerie kind of spearheads and organizes all of that, and she also will on her own do a lot of the flavor text for things like heroes and card backs and a lot of the cards as well. So it's part everyone on the team, and it's part Valerie being a rock star. Someone was wondering if we also play WoW, and if we look at abilities in game or stuff like that to get ideas. I don't play much WoW, but I do whenever I'm like working on a new card or anything like that, I'll go and I'll look up everything I can find out about the character in the card, or if it's an existing character or an existing spell, anything like that. If there are like any raids associated with it that I can watch or stuff like that. Definitely for the easiest example to point to there is Demon Hunters, and that was also one where I was watching a ton of footage, but I was also just talking to the VFX artist on the WoW team a lot, and they were one of the artists over there, Sarah in particular, was an absolute saint and helped me out a ton with making sure that I was like catching all the right parts of Demon Hunter to bring over. But basically, for anything where there is an existing parallel in WoW, try to do my homework if I'm the one doing effects for it.
Yeah, and that goes for the whole team. Again, I don't. I've played a little bit, but I don't. Especially these days, we don't have time for that. My wife used to play a lot, and so I'm always able to ask her for advice as well. But again, there are definitely a lot of people on the team who do play a lot, and we do also have access to WoW builds if we need to go in and look at something or take screenshots for reference or anything like that. And Wowhead is our friend. Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that Hearthstone is built into the WoW universe, so we want to make sure that if we're coming up with something, we want to ground it, especially because a lot of these elements, even if they're super minor, like people will recognize a callback to something or a reference to something, even if it was something that not that many people will get. So I think it's a lot of the time it's nice, even for a pretty small thing, to like go back and make sure you're if there's something that you can reference, being able to do that, and I think that really adds to the charm of the game when people can look at it and be like, "Hey, I remember that," and have that like nostalgia hit or whatever. Or if we take something and then twist it in a slightly new direction, being able to understand exactly where that initial direction came from and what we can do with that. We have a few people on the art team who originally were on the WoW team, so they are great sources of information on like everything that we could ask. So that's really, really handy as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something that varies a lot across the team. We've got a bunch of people who don't really play WoW at all. We've got a bunch of people who basically live there and everything in between. So, so someone was just asking if we prefer working off of something that already exists in WoW, like Demon Hunters, or if it's something that's brand new for Hearthstone. For me, this is going to sound like a wishy-washy answer, but there are really fun things about both. I really like having kind of constraints in what I'm working on. It kind of adds to that puzzle element. So something that already exists in WoW, especially in a very one-to-one situation like Demon Hunter, is really, really fun because a lot of the focus is on figuring out exactly how to exactly which parts to bring over and how to translate those important things into Hearthstone. One of I guess a small example of this with Demon Hunters, but there's, even though those tattoos are a huge part of the Demon Hunter look in WoW, it's not something that we brought a ton of over to on the Hearthstone side, because kind of the whole thing with tattoos is that ideally they kind of wrap around your skin and conform to that shape and stuff like that. Which we still used them in Metamorphosis because how can you not? But trying to wrap tattoos around a bunch of minion tokens in kind of a generic feeling way felt a little bit odd, which is why we kind of leaned more on the glows plus runes for stuff like that. So it's a lot of little decisions like that that are really fun for just trying to find out what exactly the right hole is to bring over. On the side of bringing over new stuff, it's definitely, or creating new stuff, it's definitely, that one's definitely very tricky, I think, for anyone. But on the effects side, it's tricky because effects is kind of an odd way to be communicating a character. So, it's definitely different from writing VO or doing the initial 2D drawing or stuff like that. Also really fun. It's, I would say, there's a lot more creative freedom there, and you're usually chatting with a different group of people than you would be otherwise. But I think they're both fun in their own ways, definitely. And also just mixing and matching within Hearthstone is, there's so much in Hearthstone already to play with that finding all of the new cool ways to do things within that is really fun. How about for you, Luke?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's funny, so I don't want to keep bringing this up, but having worked on the Heroes team for so long, I mean, that was a huge exercise in drawing the line between coming up with new things and then building on people's nostalgia and using characters that people recognized or characters that didn't, and creating something new. And it's really fun to reimagine. I mean, that's one of the reasons I got to Blizzard because I was doing fan art, and Heroes was a sort of love letter to all of those characters that we all loved. So being able to take someone a hero that we were really excited about, and either create a skin for them that was really interesting, that was completely new, or reimagine them because they only showed up in a game 15 years ago when we had to update their model. Like, that was always a really fun thing. And on the few occasions that I had to do something completely new, a lot of the time I'd be like, okay, I've sort of forgotten how to do this. That was always a little fun. But yeah, I think there's definitely there's different challenges to each, and I think like both of them are really enjoyable for different reasons. I think having to do too much, just like, and we try and avoid it a little bit. We try and put a spin on everything. Like, we don't want to do too much just going into WoW and copying the same thing and just bringing it into Hearthstone. I think there's always going to be some level. There's a lens of Hearthstonification that goes through everything. So even if it's something completely new, like a race that's like new that we're like, hey, that'd be fun to add into Hearthstone, and then maybe it'll trickle back into WoW or whatever, or something that we are trying to keep fairly close. We want to take a look at it and see what are the elements of it we can push, just to make it feel more like it fits in Hearthstone as, and make that distinct from the WoW universe.
Someone was also wondering if there's, especially anything from WoW, but just like any types of characters that you have like an especially hard time drawing. What's trickiest for you? Especially as far as like, WoW characters, stuff like that.
Yeah. I feel like I don't know. I think I've done a lot of everything at this point. So there's nothing that I get to and I'm like, that's going to be a challenge. Necessarily. Some things I'll enjoy more than others. I think some of the things that are harder are things that might be more generic. So if it's like, make a WoW human, like, because like if I'm drawing even a blood elf or like a night elf, they've got very specific things that are quite obviously like blood elf or night elf, and then you can play those things up in a way that emphasizes them. But if you're drawing just like a human character, there are so many other like IPs that could then slot into, so you have to find the thing that really feels like WoW, or that then you can play up that really feels like Hearthstone. So a lot of that time it ends up coming down to like armor sets and things like that. But there are elements to just the way we stylize faces, or that sort of thing that we really try and focus on. And those things that are more subtle can be more challenging to like really hit properly and make them instantly recognizable.
Someone was wondering about the lighting on your card back. Just if the like top right main light is standard across everything.
Yes, it is. It's really nice because it means that's one of the things that is like can be a really big challenge whenever you're painting anything, is like choosing a light scheme that sort of fits and works with your art, or really emphasizes something. So having especially for all these 3D objects that end up in the game, having just a consistent lighting direction and angle for everything takes that guesswork out of it every time, and it really helps everything just feel like, even if things are built out of all sorts of different materials or different styles, really, like if you have like a bunch of your card backs on one screen, for example, that's really, having that consistency is really important.
Someone asked a while ago, I'm sorry it took me a while to get around to this one, but someone was wondering what my favorite legendary animation that I've done has been, which is kind of a funny one because a lot of my favorite effects that I've done aren't legendaries. They're the weird stuff like crushing walls and Plague of Death and stuff. I think the I did all of the quests, all of the quest complete effects. Aside from like the giant gold exclamation point that's on all quest completes is John Swicker's from back in Angoro, but all of the like creations of the hero powers on those. And I really enjoyed doing those, even though they're a little bit lower key. It was just a really fun little set to be able to work on. And then a lot of the Loa, probably like just because the Loa were something where we got to play around with like, these rigged and animated characters that we were bringing over from WoW and kind of trying to Hearthstoneify and stuff like that. Those were really fun. Legendaries in particular was a tough one for me because it's one of those ones where I pretty much always look back and I'm like, oh no, I would change like almost everything about this. But those were some really fun ones to work on at the time. Someone was wondering what games we play when we're not working.
So I've sort of fallen off the bandwagon a little bit these days, not having a heap of time to play games. I try and get a little bit in now and then. So it's been a while now, but over the Christmas break and earlier in the year, I was trying to finally finish Horizon Zero Dawn. I was still really enjoying that. I'm like halfway through it. I'll play a little bit of Hearthstone now and then. Still, because I have to go out and walk the dogs every day, I still play Pokemon Go. And that's sort of it. I wish I had over the Christmas break. Actually, I really wanted to play Death Stranding and just did not find the time to get into that, unfortunately. So one day.
I said we've had an internal Overwatch tournament. We've got 2 internal Overwatch tournaments going on right now. So I've been playing a lot of Overwatch, and an absurd amount of Animal Crossing. Those have kind of been my big 2 lately. And then I kind of pop in and out of Breath of the Wild still, just because I bloody love that game. Those have kind of been some of my big ones lately. Yeah. But it's a long list. I kind of live on my Switch a lot of the time these days. There are a lot of good games on there. Luke, someone was wondering how influential the like kind of Metzen Samwise style has been for your own art.
Quite a bit, really. Like it's one of them. I think I'm really grateful that when I joined Blizzard, I joined on Team 1 and got to work with Sammy for many years. And even outside of the art, which was obviously like super inspiring to me when I was a kid, like playing StarCraft and playing Warcraft 3, his like sense of design and just the philosophies of like what makes things cool and what makes things exciting is really like one of the reasons that Blizzard is so like the Blizzard art is as iconic as it is. So yeah, like those philosophies on art are like definitely something that I try and remember. It's that time of day again. That's the perfect sign to say we should be wrapping up soon because we've got 7 more minutes of stream. But yeah, so obviously, if anyone was here yesterday, you will see the dramatic difference in how much I got done yesterday to how long it takes to do these like finer details. And again, that's like it's a very tough thing to do. That to I talked about this a little bit yesterday. Is like, how do you know when something is finished, and what level of detail do you want to put into it? What level of rendering do we want to get into it? And I'm like literally constantly asking myself as I paint this, like, does this bit feel finished yet? Especially like when you're doing a rough sketch or even just a rough underpainting, like you're implying so much, and so much of it is like, that'll be fine later when I finish it up. And then like how you actually approach those materials really makes a difference to how long something takes. So like some of these elements, like I'm really happy with this feather antenna here. Some of these elements may be a little too fine, so it's possible that when I do a pass at the end, some of that will get simplified. Like I've got 5 little feathery vein pieces here. Maybe that gets reduced to 3 just for readability. I didn't even get to any of this outer border stuff. Like, so there's probably a couple of days of work getting everything here to the final stage, which on one hand is encouraging, because I was like, at the end of the stream yesterday, I was a little concerned that there wouldn't be enough to fill another 2-hour stream. I was like, wait, is this how long it should be taking me to make a card back? But no, this is all those final little details that really take up the rest of the time are really what takes a piece from looking like pretty good to being really polished enough to go into the game. And then there's a lot of back and forth on like lighting and playing with the contrast of areas, like the details on the wings here. Like there's going to be a couple more passes back and forth between how much these like larger little panels stand out, how much you see of all this these small scales on here, like whether that's getting too busy, whether I knock that back and let that be a part of the effect pass where they only show up when you've got a light like swinging across them. Those are the things that I play around with a lot. And even like this sort of, I didn't really get to it. I've got a little bit implied in here, but what this material is in here, I'm not quite sure yet. What we do with this metal piece around the edge, as you might have noticed, I was putting that off and doing the things that I know where they're going right now, as I did with the sketch on day 1. But again, even some things like that are even just getting the lighting set up and making sure like it feels the right level of 3D, like, because we want the card backs to feel like a 3D object that you could potentially hold in your hand and rotate around, but we also want to make sure it looks like it's not like a cake. It's something that it's not going to shuffle nicely, but you could conceivably stack it potentially. So finding a level of like, where does this shadow, should this shadow be here closer to the pack? How far do these shadows fall across the wing? Where does this shadow go? Like, and how those things adjust. Because if you look at the whole thing without any of those, not that I painted it like that, but yeah, seeing like, especially for areas like this, like how deep is this inset element? Like what do these shadows do to make the rest of these pieces read? Am I going to need to paint a shadowing for this bit? What does that do to? Does that make it pop out more, or does it just make it more confusing? So there's really a lot of small elements like that take a lot of time to figure out.
Do you want to try and tank a couple more questions real quick, or
sure.
do you want?
Yeah, no, we can take, if there are a couple more quick ones, I'd be happy to answer, and then we can properly wrap up.
All right. So someone was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the pros and cons of starting out with traditional uh, versus digital art. And there was a similar one a while ago about just how long it took you to get used to uh, painting digitally compared to traditional.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said a little earlier in the stream, I've been working in Photoshop, in a version of Photoshop, for basically 20 years now. Though, like when I was a lot younger, I certainly wasn't doing, like, I only had a mouse. Like I'd say maybe 18, 17 years of that has been. So the first few years was just using a mouse and not even doing any real painting. I did a lot of my initial stuff, digital art, in Illustrator, because you could do that with a mouse. I think all of the main, like, artistic sensibilities, like color and light and understanding of layout and composition and all those elements, all of those are exactly the same whether you're working in digital or traditional. I think the challenging things come when you transition into having to work in a production environment, and you need to be working, like, you need to be finishing things on time, and you need to be aware of, like, the how you need to be outputting things. Especially, like, concept art is easy a lot of the time because you can just paint. It doesn't really matter what the end result is. It doesn't matter, like, the file types or all that sort of thing. But when you're creating art that has to go directly into the game, you have to know, like, a lot more technical things about resolutions and all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think the biggest thing, honestly, is for being an artist, all those things you can sort of pick up once you start working, as long as you're at least a little bit technical, or you have a little bit of an understanding. But the things that make a great artist great are the same whether you're working in paint or whether you're working in a digital format. All right, I think that's about it. Man.
Yeah. We did it.
Did it. So yeah, I'd say some of these elements are pretty close to final. I didn't do any of that might have been fun to do, but the like the glowy bits in the middle, I didn't really push that too much. But these other physical elements around that compass rose are getting really close to done. The wing, this top, I was mostly focusing on that. I will try and mirror and copy this, like, piece from the top, but a lot of early on in the painting process, you can use like the mirror function to really get everything pretty much the same. But once you're starting to have to take the lighting into account, you really have to paint each side individually, because that's something that really is really obvious and makes a big difference between something feeling like just a digital piece of art that you've just mirrored versus a 3D object that is really reacting to the light. Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with where we ended up. I hope. I'm not sure how we're going to show off this thing if you have to wait till September when we show it off to see the final product. But I hope it turns out really cool in game. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and asking all your questions and just watching. Thanks so much, Hadidjah, for tanking all those questions and being here for moral support.
Believe in you, Luke. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. This has been super, super fun. Hopefully we'll get to do something like this again. Super apologies if we did get to your question. Tried to hit most of them. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. And thank you, Luke, for kicking ass and taking names.
Very welcome. All right. Yeah. See ya, everybody.
Cheers, y'all.
Oh, it's good to see you again. Pull up a chair by the hearth.